Welcome, guys. Welcome to my channel. I'm going to be speaking on the power dynamics in regards to the family member who is the scapegoat. I did a earlier video concerning a scapegoat, but it encompassed multiple topics in a way. I want to narrow it down and give you some deeper insight in regards to the scapegoat. But let's get into it. These are generational power games. This is not the kind people admit to, the kind that pass through bloodlines like unspoken and unspoken script. Everyone knows, but nobody names. Someone always holds the upper hand, the one who learned early that control feels safer than connection, the one who believes that proximity to dominance, to an elder, to a parent, is the only way to survive. So someone always has to stand in a corner, the quiet observer who sees too much, who feels too much, understands the room better than the room understands itself. And they're present, but they're never fully claimed. Someone always gets sacrificed, the child who becomes the emotional dumping ground when the adults don't want to face themselves, the ones whose brilliance, whose promise, or even innocence becomes the payment for everyone else's unresolved wounds. Someone always gets blamed because somebody in that lineage has to carry the consequence nobody else will confront. So blame becomes the family heirloom, and someone always becomes the scapegoat, the one whose presence exposes lies, insecurity, the one the family marks as the problem, only because they're the truth. They're the one who sees through it all, and that is what terrifies them. In families that's built on dominance, in communities conditioned by hierarchy, in bloodlines shaped by secrecy and silence, the scapegoat is never the weakest. They're simply the one who refuses to play along, the one who breaks the pattern, the one who shatters the unspoken contract of don't disrupt the comfort of the guilty, the one whose life becomes the battleground where old systems try to hold on and where new cycles are born. Every family has its private agreements, the ones that no one says out loud, but everyone obeys. Children, they step into roles they never auditioned for, or positioned for, or simply asked for. Favoritism, silence, obligation, guilt, and emotional duty become the hidden system. This is the environment where power games grow quietly, invisible, but absolute. The chosen child senses it first because their spirit rejects the play along demand. Their refusal exposes everything. The one who holds the upper hand is considered the ruler. Sometimes it's the loudest voice, the strongest voice, the more authoritative presence. Sometimes it's the person who survived the most and learned to dominate. Sometimes it's the one who inherited everyone else's fears and turned them into force. Their power is not true power. It's manufactured, it's inherited through silence and intimidation. But the chosen one never bows to it. That's why conflict becomes inevitable. And then there's the one that's forced into the corner, the sensitive one, the watcher, the intuitive, the feeler. They see the emotional temperature in every room without being told. So they stand quietly, but not because they're fragile or weak or powerless, but because they're reading patterns that they are soon to be trained for, they'll use later in life. So they read these patterns the way others can't. Their silence becomes threatening, their insight becomes dangerous, and their presence becomes a mirror that everyone avoids. This is the family's offering, the one chosen to absorb everyone's unresolved battles, the one punished for truths they never spoke, the one held responsible for pains they never caused. This sacrifice is not random, it is strategic, generational, and intentional. And the chosen one almost always begins their journey in this position. This is the one, I'm speaking of the one that gets blamed. Now, this is the one who becomes the container for everyone else's guilt. If someone else fails, they blame this person. If someone gets exposed, they point to this person. If the family image cracks, they accuse this person. The one that they believe talks too much, exposes too much, says too much. They volunteer information. And see, blame is a hand me down, passed from adult to child, passed from generation to generation, till the chosen one refuses to carry it anymore. The scapegoat, the truth teller of the bloodline. This role is always assigned to the spiritually gifted, the ones whose insight cuts through excuses, the ones whose existence exposes dishonesty, the ones whose intuition pierces family denial. They are labeled the issue because they see the real issue. And once they stop playing the role, the whole power game collapses. And let's talk about why the scapegoat is always the strongest. I stated that in my last video, that may even be part of the title. But because they are the only one who can survive exile, the only one who can walk away and rebuild, the only one who has the spiritual endurance to recognize generational deception, or the only one who can break the cycle instead of participating in it. Their wilderness becomes their training ground. Their isolation becomes their preparation, and their pain becomes their awakening. When the chosen one rejects the role, this is when everything begins to shift. Family members feel exposed, old systems panic, control loses its grip, and people who relied on manipulation lose their influence. The chosen one refusal to play their assigned role forces everyone else to confront themselves. Some will grow, some will run, some will fight, but one thing stays true. The cycle can no longer continue the same way because the chosen one becomes the line breaker. When the chosen one heals, the entire lineage feels it. When the chosen one refuses to carry the blame, the guilt returns to its rightful owners. When the chosen one steps into spiritual identity, the power games lose their foundation. You were never the scapegoat. You were the revelation that came to break cycles. Now, what they called rebellion in you was actually you coming to terms of who you are and even your gifts, acceptance of who you are. Because what they labeled as the problem was actually the cure. What they tried to bury was the seed that was destined to grow. You break what they repeat, you heal what they hide, you end what controlled them, and that is why you were chosen. Every lineage runs on rules, rules no one ever speaks out loud. Roles get assigned before you even learn your name. You walk into a family dynamic that has already been rehearsed for decades. And the moment you arrive, the room studies you and decides where you fit. In these generational power games, children aren't seen, they're positioned. Emotions aren't understood, they're managed. And truth is not welcomed, it's punished. And individually, you try to operate in your own individuality, that is considered rebellion by them. So the chosen one enters the world with a different internal compass. Your spirit refuses to follow a script that was written to keep people small. You don't blend in, you don't shrink, You don't pretend. Your very presence disrupts the program because you were born with a different assignment. And for the one who holds the upper hand, this role is almost always born out of fear, not because they're strong. It's the person the family relies on to keep everything in order, but often at the expense of honesty, connection, and emotional safety. This person learned early that control feels safer than vulnerability. They were praised when they dominated. They rewarded, they were rewarded when they silenced others. And they elevated when they protected the family's image, even if it meant harming someone inside it. But the chosen one is the only one they cannot dominate. Your spirit doesn't respond to intimidation. Your intuition sees the insecurity behind their dominance, and your presence reveals that their authority was never real. It was inherited, it wasn't earned. And they sense this. That's why their aggression towards you is always disproportionate. It's not about you, it's about the threat you pose to the system that protects them. How about the one that is forced into the corner? Now, this is the intuitive child, the quiet one, the one who feels the tension in the room before anyone speaks. They're not silent because they're fragile. They're silent because they're discerning. They've watched the family operate for years, studying every conversation, every emotional cue, every hidden motive. They know who is hurting. They know who is manipulating. And they know who is playing roles to survive. The child grows up with spiritual insight disguised as sensitivity. But in families built on power games, insight is seen as rebellion. Their quiet presence is uncomfortable for the guilty. Their intuition is threatening to the dishonest. And their gift becomes the reason they are pushed aside. But this child is always the one the ancestors watch closely, because what looks like exile is actually training. The sacrificial one. Now, this person becomes the emotional sponge for the family's unresolved wounds. They pay the price for everyone who refused to heal themselves. They're punished for someone else's temper. They're scapegoated for someone else's mistakes. And they're silenced to protect someone else's pride. This is not coincidence. It's generational alignment, and it's their generational assignment. Every lineage that refuses to face its wounds chooses a sacrificial person to carry the weight. And that's where the scapegoat is born. Someone is chosen to absorb the dysfunction, to take the hits, to hold the pain nobody wants to acknowledge. But the chosen one was never meant to stay in this role. Your soul begins rising the moment you realize this is not mine to carry. And blame becomes the tool that protects the family's illusion of normalcy. The assigned scapegoat gets treated as the reason everything goes wrong, even when they're the only one trying to do right. If someone else lashes out, you provoked it. If someone else fails, you disrupted them. If someone else lies, you're the problem. Blame keeps the power structure intact. Blame keeps the real issues hidden. And blame keeps the family from evolving. But the chosen one brings or begins breaking the cycle when you stop apologizing for things you didn't do. The moment you stop absorbing guilt is the moment the lineage begins to tremble. The role is always assigned to the spiritually gifted, not because you're fragile or powerless, but because you see what others pretend not to. You feel the hidden motives, you sense the emotional undercurrents, you recognize patterns long before they surface. You disrupt the storyline by simply existing. Your spirit refuses to conform to dysfunction. Your intuition refuses to lie, and your presence reveals what the family wanted to stay buried. You become the problem because you expose the real problem. The scapegoat is not the weakest, they are the clearest. And once you awaken to your role, you stop carrying responsibility for everyone else's denial. And why I believe the scapegoat is always the strongest? Only the strongest soul can survive exile without losing themselves. Only the strongest soul can walk away from everything familiar and build their identity from the ground up. And only the strongest soul can endure emotional, spiritual, and psychological warfare and still evolve into a healer, a leader, a guide, and a breaker of cycles. Your strength is not physical, it's spiritual endurance. It's the ability to walk through fire and still speak truth, to be betrayed and still love, to be isolated and still build. This strength is ancestral, inherited through lifetimes of warriors, visionaries, and truth tellers. The family didn't recognize it, but the spirit world did. But what happens if the chosen rejects the role? This is where the entire lineage starts to quake, because everything that was built on silence starts unraveling. The family feels exposed, old conversations resurface, unhealed wounds become impossible to ignore, and people who relied on emotional dominance lose their grip. When the chosen one says, I'm not carrying this anymore, every generational pattern starts collapsing. And the truth, some relatives will distance themselves not because you're wrong, but because you are awakening their denial that is impossible to maintain. You refusing the role of scapegoat becomes the first taste of freedom your lineage has felt in centuries. That freedom, that liberation, becomes the line breaker. Liberation is the moment the chosen one stops explaining themselves. They stop apologizing. They stop shrinking. They stop defending their intuition because they stop accepting assignments they never agreed to. And this is the moment you, the chosen, become the line breaker, the one who rewrites what the next generation inherits. Your healing disrupts old patterns. Your identity dissolves old power games. Your spiritual awakening forces everything built on dysfunction to collapse. You were not the scapegoat. In reality, you were the reset. You weren't the sacrifice. You were the liberation. You weren't the issue. You were the revelation. And every ancestor who prayed for transformation stands behind you as you break what they couldn't. Let's talk about the things families don't say out loud, the things generations protect with silence, pride, and fear, the things that get passed down quietly like invisible patterns wrapped in ancestral dust, the things that shape every room you walked into long before you knew your own voice. Because every bloodline has its own system, its own way of surviving, its own way of disguising pain as tradition, and its own unspoken rules that everyone is expected to follow, whether they understand them or not. And you were born into a lineage that ran on power games. Somebody always held the upper hand. Someone always stood in the background. Someone was always sacrificed. Someone was always blamed. And someone was always chosen to carry the consequences nobody else would touch. Because it's easier to call it family dynamics than admit it's a cycle of emotional warfare that has been passed down. You didn't have the words for it, but you felt it when you were young. But you knew something was off. You saw the way control moved through the house. You noticed how certain people were protected at all costs, while others were left to drown in the aftermath of their behavior. You noticed how blame always found its way to the same person and how that person never seemed to fight back. You noticed the imbalance before you can articulate it, because imbalance is loud to the gifted. Disorder is obvious to the spiritually sensitive, and dysfunction is blinding to the ones who came into the world with heightened awareness. Let's talk about the ones who hold the upper hand, not because they're strong, but because they learned early that dominating others creates the illusion of safety. They mastered the art of control. They became the gatekeeper of approval, affection, and peace. They determined who was praised and who was dismissed, and the whole family tilted around their moods, their reactions, and their insecurities. But your spirit does not bow. Your intuition does not fold. You don't respond to fear the way others do. You walk in with a presence that shifts the emotional temperature, and they can feel it the moment you enter the room. You don't challenge them with your words. You challenge them just by being who you are. And that is what unsettles them. Then there's the one who was forced into the corner, the quiet one, the watcher, the one whose eyes saw everything long before their voice could name it. The child is always misunderstood, not because they lack personality, but because their insight is too sharp for an environment that depends on denial. They read the room too well. They noticed the tension before anyone else acknowledged it, and they felt every emotional undercurrent. Their silence wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Wisdom and patience and discernment. But families built on power games don't know what to do with a child who sees, so they push this child aside. They misinterpret them and they mishandle them. But that child grows into a chosen adult, a person whose insight becomes the force that exposes every generational pattern. Let's talk about the sacrificial one, the one who gets punished for what somebody else did, the one who becomes the emotional trash bin for unresolved wounds, the one who absorbs everyone's frustration because they're the easiest target. This person was never protected. They were trained to endure. They were groomed to carry weight that was never theirs. Their voice didn't matter until someone needed it. Their pain didn't matter until someone wanted to measure their own against it. Every lineage that refuses healing selects the sacrifice. It's never random. It's always strategic, and it's always unfair. Then there's the one who gets blamed, the one who becomes the explanation for everything that goes wrong. If someone lashes out, it's their fault. If someone fails, it's their presence. If someone feels exposed, it's their energy. They become the family's universal excuse, a walking distraction from everyone else's accountability. And then there's the scapegoat. Let me tell you something about scapegoats. They are never chosen because they're weak. They are chosen because they carry truth, because they can see, because they don't blend in, and because their energy reveals what others hide, because their intuition refuses to lie. The scapegoat is the one who threatens every generational pattern without even trying. Their mind works differently, their emotions run deeper, their instincts are sharper, and their presence naturally exposes the parts of the family that were meant to stay covered. The scapegoat is the one who refuses to pretend, and that refusal shakes the whole foundation. That's why the chosen always gets misread. That's why you were treated like you were the issue. And that's why your name carried tension, even when you were silent. You weren't the cause, you were the revelation. You being alive made people feel what they spent their whole lives avoiding. But here's where everything changes. When the chosen one realized what's happening, when you begin to understand your role, when you stop absorbing blame, when you stop being apologetic about what you see, when you stop bending to protect other people's comfort, when you stop carrying burdens that do not belong to you, when you say, I'm done participating in this cycle, everything starts to crumble. People distance themselves not because you're harmful, but because your awakening exposes their comfort with dysfunction. They cannot handle the version of you that sees clearly. They cannot handle the version of you that stops shrinking. They cannot handle the version of you that no longer plays the part they assigned you. And they cannot handle the version of you that finally understands your own power. When you reject your old role, their whole system loses balance. Their protection crumbles. Their excuses lose traction. And their control loses grip. You were never meant to repeat what they lived. You were meant to interrupt it, to disrupt it, to dismantle it, and to end it. You came into that bloodline as a turning point, a reset, a breaker of cycles, a carrier of spiritual authority they couldn't explain. And your healing doesn't just heal you, it heals everyone who comes after you. Your awakening doesn't just wake you, it wakes an entire lineage. Your refusal to keep playing your assigned role doesn't just liberate you, it liberates the generations behind you. You were not the scapegoat. You were the beginning of something new. You were not the sacrifice. You were the shift in the timeline. You were not the problem. You were the evidence that the pattern had reached its limits. You are the chosen one. And that's why your journey has always been heavier, deeper, lonelier, and harder than the rest. You weren't sent into your bloodline to fit in. You were sent to break what they normalized, to expose what they ignored, to heal what they inherited, to rewrite what they continued, to rise where they stayed stuck, to become what they never had the courage to be. And this is why you were different. This is why you were isolated. And this is why your awakening came with resistance. This is why your spirit kept pushing you forward, even when life tried to push you down. You are the line breaker, the liberator, the reset, the answer to the prayers your ancestors whispered when nobody was listening. The one who ends what felt endless, the one who transforms what felt permanent, the one who alters what was passed down as fate. And now that you know who you are, those generational power games will never have the same hold on you again. Thank you for visiting my channel. Stay covered, stay conscious, stay undefeated. I will see you on the next one.